In cybersecurity, we spend a lot of time reacting to attacks after they happen. But what if you could stop them before they even start? Well, that's the whole idea behind a really powerful process called threat modeling. And today, we're going to break down exactly what that means.
And look, this isn't just some abstract warning for the big banks. The International Monetary Fund is basically saying that a single, well-placed cyber attack could create a ripple effect that touches every single one of us. We're not just talking about stolen data here. We're talking about something that could shake global financial stability.
And to bring this home, it's not just some abstract economic threat. So what does this number mean? That's 14.7 million real people whose sensitive, personal data was stolen in just one single attack on the Mr. Cooper Mortgage Company. This is what's at stake on a very personal level.
So, how do we even begin to defend against threats this big? Well, here's the roadmap for this explainer. We're going to look at the modern threat landscape, then we'll define what threat modeling actually is, walk through how it's done, see it in action, and finally, look at what this all means for the future of cyber defense.
All right, let's dive right in. First up, the battlefield. What does the modern threat landscape actually look like today?
Think about it. Our whole financial world is built on these interconnected systems, right? And as more companies move to the cloud, what they're really doing is increasing their attack surface, which, in simple terms, just means more doors and windows for a hacker to try and break in. And it's not just about protecting one company anymore. A single weak link in the supply chain, like we saw with the MoveIt hack, can cause this massive domino effect, hitting major banks all at once. Every single connection is a potential way in.
Okay, so threats are everywhere. It can feel a little overwhelming. How on earth do we get ahead of the attackers? Well, that's where this thing called threat modeling comes in.
So what does that actually mean? At its core, threat modeling is a structured way to ask the tough questions before something bad happens. It's all about mapping out your system, finding the weak spots, and then creating a prioritized plan to fix them. It's the difference between asking, "Oh no, how were we attacked?" versus, how could we be attacked?
And I know this might sound super technical and complex, but honestly, the basic idea is something we all do every single day. It's just like a kid figuring out the safest path across the playground to avoid a bully. You identify the threat, that's the bully, and you plan a countermeasure, taking a different route. It's the exact same logic, just applied to complex digital systems.
And this right here, this slide really gets to the heart of it. It's about a fundamental shift in your mindset. You're moving away from being a firefighter, just reacting and putting out fires after a breach, and you become an architect, designing a system that's fire-resistant from the very start. Okay, so we get the proactive mindset, but how do you actually do it? How does this translate into a practical process? Let's break down the steps.
Generally, it all boils down to these 4 key steps. First, you diagram. You draw a map of your system so you can actually see how everything connects and talks to each other. Second, you identify the threats for every piece of that map. Third, you mitigate. You figure out how you're going to defend against those threats. And finally, number 4, you validate. You make sure your defenses are actually built, in place, and working the way you think they are.
Now, that second step, identify, that can be the tricky part. Where do you even begin brainstorming all the bad things that could happen? It's kind of overwhelming. Well, to solve this, Microsoft came up with this brilliant little framework way back in 1999. It's called Stride, and believe it or not, it's still one of the most popular tools for this today.
What Stride does is give you 6 neat categories of threats to think about. You've got spoofing, tampering, and so on. It's basically a checklist for your brain. It forces your team to systematically think through all the different ways a system could be attacked, which helps you find the blind spots you might have otherwise completely missed. All right, that's the theory. A 4-step process, a handy acronym. But how does this actually work in the real world? How does a framework like Stride apply to those super complex financial systems we were talking about at the beginning?
Well, it turns out different places focus on different things based on their unique threats. You'll see credit unions, for instance, might be really focused on what's called endpoint detection and response, that's EDR, which is all about protecting employee laptops. Big banks might use red teams to actively simulate attacks. Insurance companies are often all about privileged access management, or PAM, to tightly control who can see sensitive data. And mortgage companies, they're moving to zero trust, a model where basically no one is trusted automatically.
And that's a really key point. Threat modeling is not a one-size-fits-all solution. As the security strategist Steve Moore points out, you have to adapt your approach. What he's saying is, the threats you face in the cloud are totally different. You have to worry about new things like insecure APIs, those little messengers between software, or even just a simple misconfiguration that accidentally leaves a door wide open.
So that brings us to the big picture. Where is all of this headed? What's the future of cyber defense? And really, what's the whole point of doing all this work?
Because here's the most important takeaway. The goal isn't just to check a box or create some fancy diagram that sits in a folder. The real power of threat modeling is changing the culture. It's about weaving this proactive, security-first mindset into everything you do, right from the very beginning of a project.
And that is the core of it all. That's the secret sauce. The whole point is to completely flip your perspective. You have to learn to think like an attacker, to look at your own creations through their eyes. Only then can you find the weaknesses and build truly strong, resilient defenses.
So I want to leave you with a question to think about. Think about a digital system that's really important to you. Maybe it's your company's network, maybe it's just your own personal banking app. And ask yourself this: if an attacker were looking at it right now, what's the first weakness they would spot? Because answering that question, well, that's your first step toward building a much, much better defense.